Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session on nature-based solutions and cities. My name is Dora Almassy. I'm a researcher at Central European University, which is now based in Vienna. And I'm here today with our research team from Central European University. And we also have here Jennifer Lenhardt from WWF Sweden. Our team is led by Professor Laszlo Pinter. He will deliver the first presentation. Then one presentation will be followed by my colleagues Sarah Maya, Judith Boros, and Attila Katona. Then we will have an opportunity for a short Q&A about nature-based solutions and cities, and then we will give the floor to Jennifer. So now I would like to move on and give the floor to Laszlo for the first presentation. Thanks, Laszlo.
Thank you, Dora. Welcome to our session. It's a pleasure to speak this Sunday afternoon about urban sustainability challenges in the context of global goals and resilient cities. As we all know, this is a special year for more than one reason. In the context of global challenges, we've been facing unprecedented risks and vulnerabilities as a result of climate change, but also other types of extreme events in many areas of the world. Many of these events cut across not just geographies, they cut across sectors, they affect people, and of course they affect people where the concentration of people is the heaviest, and that of course includes cities, no longer just in the first world, but also in developing countries, but also in the first world. At the same time, we also have a unique opportunity this year because of the coincidence of significant global events that mobilize a lot of people in terms of climate, biodiversity, and other things. So if I just take as a reminder the climate issue, we of course have to understand the risks associated with the 1.5 target, and not just the target itself, but what happens if we don't happen to meet with target. And we do know that the implications are severe in terms of extreme weather, in terms of impact on species and biodiversity, water availability, people's exposure to different types of environmental risks, expansion of sea ice, implications of sea level rise on marine wildlife, and human well-being that depends on it, the oceans, and coastal bleaching. So these risks are real, many are here, and they are likely increasing. So as I mentioned,
to chip in, can you please switch your slideshow to full slide instead of the notes mode?
I have done that. Yep. Just 1 second. Okay, because I'm slideshow. Okay, just 1 second.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Make a difference? Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay. So in terms of the opportunities, we have two major events coming up. One is COP26 in Glasgow, focused on climate change, and the other is the biodiversity summit that is actually happening very soon in first in virtual form, and then the real in-person session in Kunming. So there is growing attention to achieving net zero targets for reducing emissions, but at the same time, it's also clear that in order to meet these targets, either climate targets or biodiversity targets, or in fact any of the other SDGs, we have to have many actors participating and chipping in on their own terms in their own context. And that's the context within which nature as a solution comes up as something that is a logical response to more than one challenge. It might be one solution, but it addresses many types of challenges: climate, biodiversity, and others. So are natural solutions, NBS, real solutions for the city? I always like to remind ourselves of the urban context that I think this audience will know by heart is the increasing urbanization, and that is happening in the context of overall population growth until at least the middle of this century, that I call the urban tsunami. Now, urban nature and the need for urban nature comes up in that context. And as cities are becoming bigger and more dense, all the urban structures start playing important roles. On the one hand, they can simply be the usual gray structures, such as the roof that's shown on the left here, or they can become multifunctional places that address multiple challenges, from biodiversity to positive impacts on human health and well-being, to their contribution to climate change, such as urban heat island reduction and other things. So climate problem is urban nature a solution. So very often this potential is still overlooked and ad hoc. So cities, because of their high density and as islands of overheating and other problems, they are really critical for meeting challenges through their changing energy use and reducing the impacts of climate change, or the exposure of people to climate change. So urban nature solutions can also support climate mitigation, such as cooling the city, but also mitigation in terms of sequestration of carbon in urban green space. They also have multiple benefits. So to improve general well-being, including mental well-being, their contribution to clean, purifying air, and overall, urban nature can foster values that can lead to additional positive behavioral changes that people in the institutions will undertake, that can have additional spin-off effects on the broader set of sustainability goals. So one more thought on why are cities a critical part of the solution. They have significant capacities in their local governmental institutions. They have a democratic mandate, as we often say. It's usually the community where individuals, where people are closest to their governance structures and institutions. There are many potential co-benefits that can be connected to local concerns that are recognized by people and whose effects are perceived on a day-to-day level. And in terms of specifically the climate problem, urban nature also contributes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions through sequestration and other measures. So I'm going to say a few words now about just as quick introduction to something that my colleagues will cover in more detail about the Naturevation project. We just finished this at the end of May this year. It was a 4-year, or 4.5 in fact, research project funded by the Horizon 2020 program. We had 14 partners across Europe, and we were interested in developing an understanding of what nature-based solutions can achieve, and how innovation can in particular play a role in this domain, increase the impact and potential of NBS, and make their potential to respond to urban sustainability challenges more wholesome, more effective. We will say a few words about tools that we developed in the context of Naturevation. One is the Urban Nature Atlas, which at this time is the most comprehensive database of nature-based solutions in cities, focused on 1,000 cases in European cities, where you get complete, very detailed evidence-based profile on these nature-based solutions, including their impacts on the biophysical environment and human well-being, their forms of governance, and so on. This is a database that can be searched in many ways through intelligent search engines, and now we are in the process of expanding that with non-ex-European cases for the Glasgow COP in collaboration with the British Academy. The other tool that we developed in Nature Basin is called the Urban Nature Navigator, which is essentially, which functions as a checklist. As you can imagine, when you pick a particular type of nature-based solution, the question comes up, what are its likely impacts on the many sustainability challenges in cities, from health and well-being to their impacts on social justice, or biophysical impacts, let's say, on water management, environmental quality like air and waste, and so on. So we compiled with the leadership of partners in Lund, in Utrecht, a checklist as the Urban Navigator that can help identify the likely contribution of any given type of nature-based solution to urban sustainability challenges. One more thing. As part of this, we also developed 3 different levels of a standard: bronze level, silver level, and gold level. Bronze level, just a quick checking of the likely impact of nature-based solutions. Silver level involves some contextualization and participation of stakeholders, and the gold level, which would be a full-scale, more in-depth study of NBS and their implications. Taking this one step further, the last thing I would like to mention is a tool we call the Urban Nature Explorer. You can find the link up there. And the UNE takes this idea of exploring the possibilities and impacts of specific types of nature-based solutions to a different level, where in an interactive web-based tool, one can explore in a participatory setting the possible impacts of individually placed nature-based solutions. You can imagine this as a little bit as an intelligent dashboard focused on a particular urban context, where people participating in this exercise, grabbing and taking individual pieces of NBS on a map of their own community, perhaps, and at the same time tracking the impact of these NBS on specific sustainability targets that actually make sense in that context, and also assessing cost. So that's the end of my contribution. If I made it in time, Dora would have raised her hand if I didn't. Over to you, Dora.
Thank you, Laszlo, for giving an overview of what type of challenges cities need to think about these days. As the next presentation, we will move on to discuss further nature-based solutions and how do we understand them in cities and what type of examples we found so far during our project. But first, what we would like to ask is to ask you who are participating in this session about what type of sustainability challenges your cities are facing. So for this, we would like to ask you to go to a website which is called menti.com. And on this website, you just need to type an 8-number code, which is 80124711. This will be also posted on the Q&A session on the platform and the short link as well. So you just go there and answer a very simple question. Choose those 3 challenges that you find the biggest and the most important for your city, including climate change, biodiversity protection, community development, economic growth, urban development, and so on. So we will go back after the next presentation with another question. So we will share with you the results towards the end of the session. We will be asking you more about your interest in NBS and so on. Laszlo, if you can just close your presentation. I think we will give the floor now to our second presenter, who is Sarah Maya. And Sarah will be talking a little bit more in detail about nature-based solutions. What do we understand as nature-based solutions? What are the challenges that they can address and the impacts they can deliver? And after that, she will present the Urban Nature Atlas, which is a tool with a lot of good practices on NBS. So Sarah, the floor is over to you.
Thank you, Corinne. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it works fine.
Okay, I'm just starting with this slide just for everyone who missed the code that Dora just mentioned. Here is the website that you can open, and here is the code that will give you access to the first question. So in my presentation, I will briefly talk about what are nature-based solutions, how we see nature-based solutions within the project, and actually showcase the Urban Nature Atlas that Laszlo just mentioned. So nature-based solutions is actually a concept that evolved over time, and it actually serves as an umbrella concept for embracing different concepts that you probably already heard about, such as green infrastructure, ecosystem services, blue infrastructure, or even ecosystem-based adaptation. But at their core, all of these concepts are basically a cluster that focus on the same subject, which is learning from and by using nature to create a more sustainable system or future. As you can see here, nature-based solutions are considered as living solutions that bring more nature or nature process into cities through locally adapted, resource efficient, and systemic interventions. In the context of our research, we see nature-based solutions as projects or interventions that are inspired or supported by nature. They address current societal issues or problems like we are already covered during our presentation today. They are tailored to actually local and context-dependent circumstances, and they serve to protect or restore ecosystems as well as build resilience. As mentioned today, nature-based solutions can address a multitude of sustainability challenges. They usually can even address them simultaneously. As you can see here in this example, it can range from environmental focused challenges like heat island and air quality improvements or water management. They can also focus on social or cultural problems such as improving social cohesion or even improving health and recreation opportunities within cities. And they also can address economic focused challenges like economic development or creation of jobs. This meaning that nature-based solutions can actually deliver a multitude of benefits. Again, they can range from environmental focused benefits for the social, cultural as well, and for the economic as well. And what we realized when we analyzed a wide diversity of cases is that usually nature-based solutions actually address multiple benefits or challenges at the same time. Within Natureovation, just to organize our thinking around nature-based solutions, we have a classification of nature-based solutions. For example, they can range for very focused or very small-scale projects like green roofs or green walls, or even rain gardens or sustainable urban drainage systems to address water management issues. They can have larger scales like parks or urban forests. They can also be seen as in blue areas like reconstructed wetlands or river restoration projects. Maybe to give a bit an overview of the diversity of projects, I will just showcase a few examples that we have collected over the past 4 years in our project. For example, here is an example of a green roof that it's actually seen as a park that has benefits related with insulation of the building due to the green roof, but it also delivers like social benefits for social interaction and social cohesion. For example, here we have a community garden in Portugal, which of course focuses on the production of sustainable food, but also has benefits related to educational benefits of the gardeners and the garden. Here, for example, you can see an example of a park which was purposely designed to address recreation within the local community. You can see a few of the amenities included in this park here. Here, for example, we have a very large-scale project which was a river restoration in Germany. Here, for example, you can see an example of an urban redevelopment project that is focused on residential areas and creation of residential spaces, but concerns were also, when designing this development plan, concerns were also focused on creating amenities and green spaces for the local residents to be able to interact. Here we have a fairly well-known project, Bosco Vertical, which is seen as this vertical forest that includes a lot of different nature elements within its structure. And yeah, here, for example, you can see an example of how nature-based solutions can be implemented indoors. You have a green wall in a building in Hungary, which was designed to improve with air quality inside the building. And my last example is that, as you can see, an example of how nature was included with gray infrastructure concrete in these parking lots to be able to actually absorb water and help with water management issues. Now I'll focus on my presentation on the Urban Nature Atlas. You have the link to the database up here if you're interested. this is seen as the most comprehensive database of urban nature-based solutions. It currently has a little over 1,000 projects. The original focus of the Urban Nature Atlas was actually on European cases, but we are having quite an exciting development where the Urban Nature Atlas will actually include global cases from all around the world that will be available very, very soon, and which will build on the cases that we actually already have in the database that was developed in 2017. And also since 2017, when we first created the database, there was also several updates of information, the most relevant one being the one that we did last summer, where we actually reviewed all the cases that we have in the database, because over time projects have other impacts, or they evolve actually. And we also ended up adding a few more questions that we realized while doing research on nature-based solutions, that it's such a complex issue that actually deserves to address different issues. Just a little bit, very, very briefly, about the data collection and analysis that we did with the database. So all the data that is included in the Urban Nature Atlas is based on secondary sources. This means that we use discourse analysis to actually look into project reports, websites, scientific articles, all types of sources of data that can help us first identify and then collect data on the projects. And all this data is referenced on our website. So if people want to know more about a specific subject, they usually can find the appropriate reference and be able to actually have access to the full document that we have based our research on. The Urban Nature Atlas database contains a lot of information. Some of the information that we have available online focus on mostly like an overview of the project, like objectives, challenges addressed, the location of the project, the goals, implementation activities. The urban settings is what I meant before by the classification of nature-based solutions. We also have information about the potential beneficiaries of the project. We also have details on the governance and financing arrangements of the projects, and of course also about of nature-based solutions. So this is like our homepage of the Urban Nature Atlas. By scrolling, you will see that actually is a tool that it's based on a map-based interface. As you can see here, you can scroll on the map and to find project based on location, but you can also use the quick filter or advanced filter options that we have on the database. The quick filter is a more superficial search where you can select a challenge. As you can see here, we have different icons for different challenges. You can also select by type of nature-based solution if you're interested in a specific type. This is our quick filter. And then you also have the advanced filter option where you will have access to other filters. Like, for example, if you're interested in a specific country or city, you can select that. If you want to learn about a specific focus, like what was the nature-based solution goal, you can also select it. As you can see here, we have several of them. And then, by just clicking, you can select one or multiple. And then, as you can see here, for example, also by browsing, for example, this is the list of the sustainability challenges. You actually have a perception of how many cases already address this challenge. And as you narrow down your research, you actually will find the appropriate numbers of projects that fit that focused research. You can still have access to the same two filters that we have on the quick filter, like the main sustainability challenge and the NBS. And as you can see here, I selected the challenge projects that aim to address climate action, either adaptation or restoration, and also parks or urban forests as a main category of nature-based solutions. And then by scrolling down, you will actually have a listed number of cases that are relevant for the research queries that you added in the database. If you want to know more about each nature-based solution has its own profile page. As you can see here, this is the main overview of one of these pages, where you can see what the project is about. There's usually a short description of the project. There's also information on timeline of the project, on location, on actually, and as you can see, if you browse, you will have specific sections on governance or financing arrangements, also on impacts of the project. I will show a couple of examples. For example, if the overview is selected, you will know more about specific objectives of the project, specific implementation activities. The beneficiaries information is also shown under the overview. If you want to know more about the governance aspect of the projects here, you can see, for example, what was the management setup that was implemented, that was actually allowing or creating the project. You'll have information on enablers who actually were responsible for the implementation of the project. as well as if there's any type of participatory approach or participatory involvement with the implementation of the project, you will also have information on that. And here, the last section that we have on data is focused on impacts of the project. This can either be impacts that are reported impacts or expected impacts when the project was first originally designed. And of course, you can also have information on other types of monitoring and assessment benefits. With the database update that I mentioned earlier that we are doing for next month, around November, in November of this year, you will have access to a new updated database, and you will also have a bit more information on some of these data sets. And of course, as I mentioned, all the data that we have in the Urban Nature Atlas is referenced, and as you can see here, you will always have access to the full list of data sources that were used to study each project, each nature-based solution. With this new update of the Urban Nature Atlas that I just mentioned, we will have a few new features. For the first time, people will actually be able to add new projects if they are interested. As you can see here at the top, we will have a specific section for that. And we will also have information on how this process of updating, of actually including new projects on the Urban Nature Atlas will be developed, and how the process of reviewing the questionnaire will also be explained on the website. And as I mentioned, since the Urban Nature Atlas now will have this global overview, projects can be updated from other regions other than Europe. Just to show you how the Urban Nature Atlas will look like from November, it's slightly different from the version that I showed earlier. And besides being able to actually add new projects for the first time, you'll have this feature. There will also be another section, as you can see here at the very top one, where we'll have a much more detailed overview, not overview, but actually analysis of data, other than the quick and the advanced filters that I showed before. There will be a search engine behind it, and people will just be able to interact a bit more with the data sets that we have within this large database. Lastly, here is the link that you can still check for the Urban Nature Atlas. And I would just like to remind everyone to please vote on the link that I showed before, the Mentimeter. Now you will have another question available, and at the end it will be useful to know your perspective, so that we can have an interactive questions and answers section. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation on nature-based solutions in the Urban Nature Atlas. So as Sarah mentioned, we are now having the second question up. I saw that many people already answered, so thank you for this. Those who didn't have the chance yet to answer the first question, if you now visit this link, type in the code, you can also answer the first question. Now our second question concerns on how what type of nature-based solutions your city could use or you would like to explore and introduce. So like green roofs or urban water management solutions or alike. So Sarah, if you stop your screen, and then I will share mine, and I will move on to the next presentation, where I want to talk a little bit more in detail about the actual findings that we have learned from the Urban Nature Atlas. So as Sarah mentioned, the Urban Nature Atlas is a very large database of existing urban nature solutions across Europe, but now we are also expanding to have a global scope. While this database was primarily meant to provide an overview of what kind of solutions exist, how they look like, who is managing them, how they are financed, and so on, to provide inspiration, to provide information to policymakers, decision makers, researchers, or just to people who are interested in nature-based solutions. We also, since this is a large 1,100 case database, it also allows us to draw some conclusions on the landscape of nature-based solutions, and to generalize and draw some conclusions on what do we know about nature-based solutions. Since the project started in 2017, this database have been gathered information since the last 5 years. Most of the data was collected in 2017, but we have an update in 2020. So what we have learned is that when we talk about nature-based solutions, many of these projects feature parks, urban forests. And also many of them feature green areas which are complementing existing grey infrastructures. These are squares or parking lots or just a green playground or green tramways, for example. Around 1/3 of the projects in the database focus on blue infrastructure, which can be, as Sarah mentioned, rivers or wetlands or even lakes. And then as we move ahead, quite one-fourth of the database brings community gardens examples, and we also have quite many green roofs or green wall projects. What we have seen in policies is that NBS, nature-based solutions, when we look at national policy documents across Europe, they are primarily seen as means to achieve environmental goals. This means that their contribution to climate change, biodiversity, even to water management is already widely recognized and supported by different policies across Europe. But when we looked at our data in the database and we looked at what type of challenges these projects in the Urban Nature Atlas are actually addressing, we have found that in practice, cities are working with nature also to address other urban sustainability challenges, which are more focusing on the social and the community aspects or even economic aspects. So what we have seen is that while almost all projects are creating some sort of green space or contributing habitat and biodiversity, almost more than half of the projects are addressing health and well-being issues or aiming to address health and well-being issues, as well as issues related to regeneration, urban development, land use, landscape planning. Around half of the projects are also aiming to improve environmental quality aspects, such as air quality or even waste management, soil quality. But then many projects are also focusing on social justice and cultural heritage or governance issues. When we looked at the primary beneficiaries, we have seen that in most cases, citizens or community groups are recognized as the direct main beneficiaries of projects. But parallel to this, local governments, public sector institutions, but often also private sectors or research institutions, universities are also often benefiting from these projects. They provide a wide range of ecosystem services. This is the categorization of the TEB. Basically, they could provide habitat and supporting services, regulating services, provisioning services such as food or fresh water, but they also can provide cultural services, such as especially recreation and health was a major factor. When we looked at the specific impacts, we have also seen that a lot of projects are expected to contributing or are already contributing to climate and biodiversity related impacts. Especially, they can deliver protection against flooding. In the brackets, you can see the number of projects where a certain impact was identified. Stormwater management or lower local temperature. In connection to biodiversity protection, many projects experienced or expected to see an increased number of species present in the areas where an actual nature-based solution was implemented, but they also contributed to the conservation or the restoration of existing or destroyed ecosystems, and they also contributed to the reducing the loss of or potential loss of biodiversity or improving ecological connectivity or just support habitat creation for pollination, for example. Besides environmental impacts, we also see that many projects are delivering health and community-related benefits. More than half of the projects delivered impacts related to health. Mostly they were recognized that they can provide, they can support activities for recreation and exercise with provisioning green areas, but many of the projects also recognize that they can indirectly improve physical health or mental health. In terms of community development, almost half of the projects, again in brackets, you can see the numbers of the projects that have that certain impact, provided improved access to urban green space. It means that in the vicinity of people, they created an area where people could go out more easily and spend some time there and have access to green areas or even blue areas. With this, many of the projects improve people's connection to nature. They bring nature closer to them, closer within the city boundaries or within the district boundaries. And this indirectly helped them to create opportunities for social interaction, improve the livability, but also in many cases, they provided opportunities to go out and have access to green areas for marginalized groups. In terms of implementation, we have seen that over the time, we have included in the database projects starting from 1990, even a little bit earlier, a few projects. We have seen that over the time, the local government's role remained important. They are almost always, or in many, many cases, they are involved as in implementing or initiating organizations, but they often work in tandem or in cooperation with other type of organizations, NGOs, community groups, private research organizations, or private companies. And this resulted in a hybrid governance and financing setup, meaning that while local governments are often leading NBS projects, they have a good cooperation and a good involvement of different other actors and stakeholders. And especially as we move towards larger projects, especially at the large scale, we often see examples for hybrid type of governance mechanisms. So to summarize, our analysis of the data that is available in the Urban Nature Atlas actually showed that nature-based solutions do have the capacity, even when we are looking at concrete project examples, to contribute to climate challenges, biodiversity challenges, but as well as to contribute to the well-being of communities, including delivering health and well-being related benefits, but also social interaction, social justice, even safety aspects, and the list can be continued. So what do we need? The question comes after this, what do we need to implement these solutions at a larger and more systematic scale? Because these solutions are often remain at a piloting stage or at a starting stage, but the aim would be to support resilience in cities and regeneration of cities. The aim would be to have these at a very large systematic scale. So to realize the potential that NBS is actually embedding in itself, there is a need to enable innovation and also to mainstream NBS practices into existing policies and plans. To enable innovation, there is a need to explore diverse modes of governance, novel business models, innovative financing arrangements, but also how to engage citizens into implementation. In our atlas, many of these cases are bringing examples for these type of innovations. So it's also, if somebody is looking for examples to get inspired by what type of governance can be imagined for such a solution, or what type of financing arrangement can be explored, the atlas is also a good place to start. So in terms of mainstreaming, it's important to highlight that urban planning and development has a key role in introducing NBS in a systematic level to cities. And for these existing institutions, existing policies and practices do need to make space for urban nature solutions. There is also a need for, of course, new regulation, new policies, new implementation plans that are considering NBS in a more systematic way. It's also important to work with partners in urban development and finance to help them recognize the value of nature and to get them involved and also to get the necessary financing. And it's also important to develop new assessment approaches which can help the cities and the policymakers and the decision makers to understand the multitude of benefits that NBS can actually deliver and the trade-offs between these benefits. And then there is also a need to translate these into actual practices, the assessment approaches. So with this, my presentation is completed. And then now we would like to just ask you to go again to the Menti And this is an open question that we would like to ask now from you. And just to share with us, what are the barriers for your city to implement NBS? What do you see as the main barriers? Is it financing? Is it the political commitment? Is it the stakeholder involvement? Or just to actually find the technical solutions? Or just to deal with other type of challenges? So now with this, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Judith Boros, who will talk about two different solutions that were implemented in two very different parts of the world, and very inspiring nature-based solutions. So she will talk in more detail about some of the things that I have raised. So Judith, the floor is over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I would like to ask first if my screen sharing is working. Do you see it?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great. I have been also a part of the Nature-Vision program with my PhD studies, and it was a case study-based research where I have worked with lots of nature-based solutions, but now I would like to present two of those in detail. So I'm just going to jump right ahead to the first case that I'd like to present. It's the Biblioteca degli Alberi Park in Milan, Italy. The name means Library of Trees, and it's called BAM in short. So this is a rather new multifunctional site in the city center, which is only about 2 kilometers from the Duomo of Milano, so very, very much in the center of the city. And it has been an interest. Long ago, it used to look like this, but not exactly like this, but it was very similar even in the early 2000s and 2010 even, because due to the industrial heritage of the city, there were hundreds of hectares of old industrial sites, even abandoned sites, which made traffic and mobility and general well-being quite challenging in the city. And it was also such an old industrial site. Later on, it got covered because of the underground development, but it was quite an uneasy area of the city, and very much close to the city center. But in the middle of three neighborhoods, which was previously separated. And as you can see, it was quite a cost-heavy investment. And in order to keep this investment in the best condition, it's actually managed by a private entity, by Coima, who is also the main developer behind the whole Porta Nuova regeneration project. What is also significant from an ecological point of view is the level of botanical richness and intensity that development brought into the urban environment. In fact, it's called the Library of Trees. So the intention was to create a modern version of the botanical garden that allows for a new way of understanding the plants, the herbs, the flowers, and their role in the city. And moreover, the developers and the designers were very conscious of how to connect the park to citizens, both during the development and also in the actual design solution. So, for example, the municipality launched a poem competition to citizens, and the winning entries are printed now on the pavement along with the names of the trees and the plants. But this is really pretty much the major aspect that they built on, how to use the park to host community events, celebrations, how to promote the park usage in the daily activities too. There are concerts, talks, dance events organized. And since it's in the middle of this new cultural nexus of a mixed-use development area, there's a very conscious utilization, or rather an understanding of how to channel activity and interaction to the park on a daily basis. There are the development of the area, but also they present the plans, explain the reasoning of the plans choice, etc. So it also serves really to bring nature closer to citizens and talk about its role. So it's a rather lively park in a lively area of the city. There's also herb garden where you can really touch and even taste and smell herbs. There's also parks for dogs, gardens for dogs within the park. Forts for individual relaxation and group gatherings. It's a very versatile environment. And there are different amenities that really encourage people to spend time there. However, exactly because of its intensive use, the management of the park is also quite demanding. And this is why it's actually managed by a private company to ease the tasks of the municipality. And maybe it's also interesting that they opened different areas of the park in different phases as they developed with the development. And the vegetation also was kind of introduced in a phased manner. And still now that it's open, but temporarily they also close some areas when the vegetation needs to be left undisturbed to allow it regrow or reseedlings when it's required. So that's about the first nature-based solution case, and I would proceed to the second one. It's called Ceres. It's in Melbourne, Australia. The name comes from Center for Education and Research in Environmental Strategies, but of course it's also the name of the Roman goddess Ceres. It's quite different from the case before. It's also located about 5 kilometers from the city center, but more residential area. And it's right next to a small creek called Mary Creek. And it's a very interesting site. It's a public site owned by the municipality, but it's managed by a federation of NGOs under the umbrella of Ceres. It's a place dedicated for community-based learning and action primarily. They run education and training programs and in sustainable living, also a community visitor center, and they also trade in organic food, permaculture plants, and sustainable timber that they produce on the site. So this way they contribute to their own financial stability. Plus it's also a site for technology demonstrations in sustainable living. It's also very versatile. For example, there are certified organic farms and the cafes where they use the produces, but of course also they sell it. There's a plant nursery, a grocery store. They use the site and the built environment to demonstrate sustainable technologies, which are built on the site, and that's how they operate, and that's what they use in a daily basis. And there are also office venue and market spaces that they can use for various community or even business events. So, but most importantly, it's really it's a home of 11 social enterprises, and all of the activities that the site allows are basically grouped into these social enterprises, which allows Ceres to be 95%. Now they receive only marginal funding from the municipality. And they have an annual report, and you can check like how many thousands of visitors they had in 1 year, what are their budgets, and what are their dedication for the next year. So it's run like a business, and it has a very interesting history. Of course, originally the Wurundjeri tribe used the land for farming before the European settlers came in, but then they used the land for quarrying bluestone. When it emptied, it became a landfill site for construction waste, and it was completely degraded. And in the 1970s, a group of residents started a community development program, and within that framework, Ceres was born. Actually, in 1982. For the reason to create employment in the area, there was also quite large unemployment, and to promote environmentally sustainable living. So it was a community empowerment project, and at that time, the land was totally desolate. There was not even one tree. But since the 80s, the land was regenerated to the highest standards due to the activities connected to Ceres. And just some highlights. So they have an environmental management plan, for example, that they tackle for themes: energy, waste, water, and biodiversity. And for example, they have a target of reaching zero emissions by the end of 2025. And they work in close connection to the municipalities' strategic vision and goals, aligning their activities to future developments. And just to illustrate the achievements in terms of biodiversity regeneration, for example, the kingfisher bird was reappeared. It reappeared in the area, and now it's nesting along the banks of the Mare Creek, which is a good indicator of the restored flora and fauna. So it's quite different side than the previous example, but it similarly affords various individual and group activities. There are many organized tours and group visits. They offer various educational courses in sustainable living. Of course, this also then channels back to their sustainability in financial terms. And what is still mentionable is that series has, I have mentioned most of this, but so it has a wide range of joint projects with academia, volunteers, community involvement groups, and they have a global outreach program through which they established an extensive education and partnership network and joint projects across the globe with other countries. And due to the presence of series, the whole neighborhood has transformed. Of course, it was during decades, but still it had become a central point and a point of reference in the area. And here, for example, you see the neighboring streets, how they look right now. So these were the two cases very quickly. And I would give the floor to Attila to continue presenting about the other cases.
Yes, shall I go ahead, Dori?
Yes, please. Thank you, Judith, for the great presentation.
Okay, so welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to share some more exciting cases with you. And I will just jump right in. For the sake of context, these cases were also developed in the Naturevation project. And if you go to the website, you will find a lot more information about them. The first one I'm going to share is from Tianjin, China. And I think it's a good example of contemporary urbanism that happens in the global south that doesn't contain much imitation of Western urban planning methods and practices, although it has been heavily shaped by solution and knowledge transfer from other countries and through partnerships and international consultants, primarily from Singapore, but it's trying to be novel and sort of position itself as a model case for China. And a couple of words from Tianjin for the sake of context where this intervention took place. It's a massive Chinese megacity. It's an economical hub. It has almost 16 million residents, and it's sort of the harbor city of North China. So a lot of economic activities take place in this coastal area where also this intervention I will share is placed. For the sake of context, this city still has a lot of challenges, and most of these challenges stem from climate change impacts, such as massive heat waves, soil erosion locally, but also extremely low precipitation. And in response to this, the Chinese government has initiated a sponge city project all over China, where in case of these sponge city projects locally, they try to capture over 75% of rainfall. And Tianjin aims to be one of these cities, and they aim to achieve this number across the city, approximately 80% of the city by 2030. And the eco-city example that I'm going to share is one of these approaches. China has undertook an eco-urbanism approach since mid-2000s. They now have approximately 250 eco-cities. And the one I'm going to talk about is called Sino-Singapore Tianjin Eco-City, which is built on a former chemically polluted saline wasteland, as you can see on the top pictures, 45 kilometers from the Tianjin city center near the coast. And it's planned for over 300,000 residents. Currently, it has about 100,000 residents. Started about 10 years ago, and they plan to finish it in 4 years. And here is a video, which I'm not sure how enjoyable will it be through Zoom, and I don't want to share the entire segment, but what I wanted to share about it is what's interesting about this project. It's a flagship bilateral project between Singapore and China, which is almost the first of its kind. And it has a large-scale private sector involvement, 50-50 ownership approximately between the Chinese and the Singaporean partners. And the governmental institutions took a leading role, but the organizational structure of this eco-city is built on a complex partnership with large-scale private sector investors as well. And stakeholders such as the Singaporean government aim to maximize also economic benefits by participating in this large undertaking, but they also back up the project, which gives it a lot of credibility for investors. And an important approach they took is these 400 by 400 meter living blocks called eco cells, where basically residents have access to most of the services they require on a daily basis in 20-30 story buildings. And all of this is connected with extensive green infrastructure, as you can see on the video, hopefully, which is strategically included in the development of the eco-city. And I'm just going to go on to the next slide. And about this green infrastructure, as you can see on the little maps, it's strategically included in the entire eco-city section in a sort of a snake-shaped kind of infrastructure green spine with a fish-bone structure, so it spans out to left and right as it goes along. It's 50 to 100 meter wide, 11 kilometer long, basically a green infrastructure line. Now it's already 200,000 square meters are built, and it follows these point city and park connector disciplines that were very important when creating this model city. It is using 22 KPIs, starting from green space per capita to what percentage of plants are native in its construction, and so on and so forth. And this is how it looks in a section where it has been freshly actually built. And some key takeaways from what we have seen in China through this and other cases is that the government is taking a very technocratic approach to scaling urban nature and achieve social goals such as the ones mentioned by my colleagues, in a very structured and straightforward way. And they are trying to satisfy urgent demands for quality of life in the rapidly extending urban middle class. And so it's a very conscious effort to incorporate urban greenery in a very structured, and they use very strong KPI systems and indicator systems to monitor progress. And in this regard, the eco-city is trying to position itself as a national leader. So already 20 other Chinese cities have adopted this KPI methodology of the eco-city. This model city approach, let's create something that is functional, scalable, and cheap enough to be deployed elsewhere. So not the highest high-tech solutions, but something that is cheap enough to be scalable and cheap enough to be affordable for at least middle-class citizens. Again, yes, scalability is very important. They are trying to create sort of context and specific solutions, and that goes in contrary with what some of the examples that were shared before by Judith and my colleagues. Here they are trying to focus on transferability of solutions, package it, unpackage it, and adapt it with local flora and fauna. And so these models are not really tied to local ecosystems, but they are rather trying to look at the best way to deploy them. Again, very strong political foundations in China are required to make this kind of progress, and it breeds a commitment as well. In terms of stakeholder involvement, in this particular case, a lot of stakeholders were involved due to its attractive to private investment nature. A lot of banks, but also local associations and NGOs were involved. Although we can see that primarily in the planning stage, it was mostly expertise and not communities who dominated the decisions. Public-private partnerships such as this are gaining an interest in the East, and it's attracting a lot of investment. It helps supporting this ongoing paradigm shift in how Chinese urban planners work. And this is something that Dori has pointed out, is that nature-based solutions are high-performance infrastructure. So we have to get away from the idea that nature is just decoration, it's fluff. It's something that we do after the hard engineering and the planning was done. We have to think of it as hard performance infrastructure that does so many things for us in a measurable way. And we have to plan it and design it as we do with all our other infrastructures. We have to think of it as a system within a city. And in the case of the eco-city, this is what happened. And I think it's a good example for that. Yes, if you're interested in the justice aspects and the community aspects of this particular case, we have published a paper on this, and you can find the information on the slide about it. And my next case is from Singapore. Singapore also participated in the dialogues about the previous case, and they were strong partners. But this one is something very local. And when you think of Singapore, already probably images of high-profile projects pop up in your mind. Gardens and greenery in Singapore is at the heart of national policy and branding and marketing since the 60s. But the case I'm going to share is not such a high-profile case, in a way that it's fairly new and fairly targeted at local communities, because Singapore, just like European cities, is undergoing a very rapid transition into an aging society, and the challenges associated with it. So they were trying to consider nationwide strategies to develop healthy psychological well-being and reduce depression rates among the elderly who are more prone to mental health risks. There are these two agendas: healing environments and gardening in this particular project, which is called Therapeutic Gardens and Therapeutic Horticulture. It has a very strong scientific foundation, and I don't want to go into detail, but in essence, it has been recognized that natural environments can be purposefully created to bring restorative and healing benefits for users, especially the elderly, incorporating design principles come from scientific evidence. So they started a sort of an experimentation process to engage in therapeutic gardening in Singapore and therapeutic horticulture. And they started clinical research as well to determine if it actually works and to what extent does it work and what kind of solutions does it provide when it comes to health and well-being. And again, it had scientific foundations. You can see the headlines and the taglines: attention restoration theory, stress reduction theory, and so on and so forth. But what they found was actually even more than this. And so what happened is that they created a model garden, a therapeutic garden in Hort Park, which is a sort of an experimental park in Singapore. And it's sort of a knowledge center and a test bed for all sorts of these green solutions that the city is trying. And in 2016, they created a therapeutic garden, again, based on evidence-based design principles in a very structured way. And it has an activity zone where a lot of programming takes place, and a lot of movable raised planter beds and wheelchair accessible walkways and easily accessible water sources are there, and so on and so forth. And it also has a relaxation restorative zone, which is basically pavilions with vantage points and so on and so forth, where those who are present can enjoy the landscape. And yes, these are some pictures of the site. Again, in the activities phase, they focused on brighter colors, brighter plants, something that you can fiddle with and actually use. And in the relaxation area, it's mostly plants that have calming effect, and it has more shaded areas for relaxation during hot summer days. And as I said, the programming is a very important part of this, and they do this with volunteers. They actually have over 100 volunteers now in different gardens who are running these events with the elderly, and also, you know, they enjoy it tremendously. I have myself participated in some workshops, and it was a very good experience. Overall, they have found very strong evidence that this works as an effective treatment and therapy. Now they have 11 such gardens in Singapore, and besides their 1,400 community gardens, this is a new sort of addition, and a total of 35,000 volunteers who are engaged in urban low-scale, small-scale gardening and education. And they have a design guidelines. If anybody is interested, you can look it up. And they have been very conscious in trying to transfer these results into actual healing processes. And there's a particularly green hospital called Kotek Puat Hospital, which taps into the healing effects of greenery. And there are therapeutic gardens in the hospital that help in the healing process, and they actively use it. They have found that people take much less time to regenerate when they have access to greenery in a hospital environment. So it actually saves them money, and it is reducing the treatment costs overall to have this, as you can see on the image. The hospital itself, this one has 16 gardens and also an 800 square meter rooftop community garden that is also managed by volunteers. Similar design principles were also implemented in for example, an elderly home, Kampung Admiralty, which you can see on the screen. Very similar principles. It's very compact design, but has a lot of greenery, and it is very attractive to middle-class senior citizens. Just some key takeaways, and I'm going to be really quick here. We have seen in Europe that lots of projects that are in the Atlas are underway. We have found hundreds, over 1,000, actually quite easily. But what we see is that they initiatives, and there is a lack in strategic coherence and scaling when it comes to nice, successful projects. And so that's something to certainly consider when we design future policies. As I discussed, and also Dori have referred to it, NBS is very high performance infrastructure. We need to treat it as such, but it also needs to interact with traditional infrastructure and create hybrid systems. We need to consider the social dimensions. It's very important when it comes to scaling and actually getting people involved. Judith's examples were fantastic, I think, to show how it works in practice. And it's a very good way to connect agendas when it comes to climate change, sustainable development goals, local issues, global issues. You can all package it and provide solutions through urban nature. A word for conservation. It's always easier to keep what we have than bring it back. And a bit of foresight. The benefits of NBS should be evaluated through broader economic logic. And again, Dori has shared very important takeaway points for this, but I have to emphasize that so many of the benefits can be monetized, public health through public health economics or other ecological economic logics, cooler air, absorption of stormwater, flood regulation. It's all, it could be incorporated in investment choices as well. And if we don't do this, then it's hard to sell urban nature. So the business case for urban nature doesn't exist without isolation from these public benefits. So this is why we need to learn about them, quantify them, and incorporate them in the decision making. Most of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 in cities is yet to be built globally. So there is never too late to start this incorporation process. And there is already a lot of knowledge available, and it's growing at an extreme speed. You have heard about the Urban Nature Atlas, the Explorer. There is also the OPLA platform for the EU, Think Nature. process by ICLAI and IUCN has been started. So there's a lot of information available, and it's important to consider all of this when we are making our next steps and policy choices. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll pass the word back to Dori.
Thank you, Attila, for this great overview and the inspiring examples. As you have seen, we started our presentations from a wider angle of what type of challenges exist and how NBS can, in theory, address these challenges. But we did find that it is indeed possible to implement this in practice and we showcased practices where they do deliver those multiple benefits that we are talking about. So we will be in the next 15 minutes. We want to take a few questions from you. So I would like to encourage all of you to please post questions in the Q&A session, and we are happy to answer them. They can also be in Turkish, and our translators will translate them for us into English. But first, before we go on to the questions, and while you are posting your questions, we would like to show you the results of the survey. We have received almost 50 answers, so thank you so much for being active and answering. And Sarah is already sharing, so over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
So here is the first question that we had related with the first presentation, which was, what are the main sustainability challenges your city is currently facing? We can see that there's a tie, mostly related with environmental quality. Then we have cultural heritage and landscape protection as an important challenge, climate change as well, but all the other ones also have pretty high numbers. As you can see here, yeah, water management as well. Maybe let's see the next slide and see what that also tells us. Okay, so this question was about the type of nature-based solutions that people would like to have implemented or created in their own city. There's quite a high number of water management related nature-based solutions. And then urban parks and forests as well. And then some types of green infrastructure connected with gray as well. Yeah, and the lowest number of nature-based solutions is also actually green indoor areas, a bit less popular, I guess. If we connect actually the nature-based solutions that people chose here with the previous slide, we can see that actually these are the solutions that aim to address the challenges of water management, of, I guess, climate change and environmental quality. I don't know, Dora, if you want to also comment.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that the cultural heritage and landscape protection were really selected by quite many participants. I would be interested to know more about that. Yeah, and then obviously the water management and environmental quality, climate change stands out as important aspects. So I think just if you move to the last slide, this was an open question and many of the answers are in Turkish, so I think we will not be able to translate those properly. But I see that I was browsing the answers and I see that there are many different issues mentioned, from economic problems to bureaucracy, general management, the price of the land, or in political issues, I guess political commitment. So those things that we are seeing across our cases, they are popping up, and these are making sure that there is a political commitment. There is also a commitment from the citizens to help this happen, and then also budgeting issues, but just in general to have the technology available, and the capacity issues should be covered as well. Knowledge I can see here, or again, bureaucracy is popping up. So I think we have very interesting answers, and we will try to share these slides maybe on the events page after the session. We will discuss this with the organizers. So we have now a few more minutes to take questions. I actually don't know if we have questions because I haven't received any, but in case we don't have yet questions from the audience, I do want to ask myself a question from our speakers. Sarah, I think now maybe we can go back to the panel view. Thanks. So I actually want to ask all of you who spoke is that there is obviously an opportunity, a potential here for realizing is upscaling nature-based solutions and making them more systematic and helping cities to be resilient, but also to become regenerative. So I want to ask you that what do you see as the, let's say, the three main issues that cities would need to overcome? What are those barriers and how to overcome them in order to ensure that NBS will be a common practice and a given. So Laszlo, if it's okay, I would give the floor first to you for a few ideas and thoughts on this.
Okay, thanks, Dora. Well, I mean, my first take on this is that I don't think it's a single thing. There are a number of things that, as we have different types of capacities, there has to be different elements to the strategy. But obviously, as it was clear from the examples, these things didn't just happen by themselves. In order for them to happen in a way that really maximizes the value, a number of things have to be in place. The community level support, obviously the technical side. You have to have sort of legal clarity about the piece of land where, or buildings where these things happen. But maybe if I can just highlight one thing, I think it's leadership. I think the case for nature-based solutions is pretty overwhelming. If we consider multiple positive impacts, even cost effectiveness most of the time, and the need for the types of services and benefits they provide. So I think if the right leadership and the right vision is actually in place, that actually recognizes this, it's kind of in our face, I think. Then I think a lot of that can really serve as a catalytic force, and the transformation can happen. And of course, leadership can be at different levels. It's best if it happens if it's at multiple levels, and there is kind of a good gelling of vision and leadership. But even if it's just one, at the community level, at the mayor level, and so on, that can be really catalytic.
Thanks, Laszlo. I see the other speakers nodding, so I guess they do agree, but I'm wondering if any of you has certain other additional ideas and thoughts to add. Attila, Judith, Sarah, or Jennifer?
Maybe I can add one.
Okay.
So I very much agree with Laszlo that it's not a single thing. And what I see is that currently we do have often very siloed way of municipal governance. So the problems that NBS is trying to solve are complex and embedded and difficult, and not usually given into tiny, shiny, quick solutions. And also nature needs time. So the governance gap to connect across domains and bureaus and stakeholders to oversee this kind of complexity can be very large in some countries, and it's scary for them. So I think we need to make it easier for them to understand the benefits and also the implementation pathways through working examples. And I think this is what we have been trying to do.
And just to add here that besides working examples that we have already mentioned a few times, the importance of assessment and having assessment tools and being able to use those tools are also very important, because this is the way to show that the benefits and what they are actually bringing, and also for the implementers, those who are doing the actual project, to understand where they can improve their project or what are the typical impact that they can receive from certain projects. So I think that's also crucial. Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah, hello everyone. I haven't spoken yet, so nice to see you all, but I just wanted to compliment the Naturation team. I'm deeply inspired by everything you said. I just wanted to add in from our side at WWF, localization matters. There's no one size fits all when it comes to nature-based solutions. It depends, as Laszlo said, on governance. It depends on local climatic conditions. For WWF, we like to promote climate resilient local solutions. So, what you might see that works here where I'm sitting in Sweden might not be the right case for the cities in Turkey, and vice versa. Another thing that has been very, very important for us when communicating with cities or other stakeholders is the value of co-benefits. And I think this came out quite a bit in a lot of the different presentations, in particular in Atilia's presentation, but just to re-emphasize that. So when we're talking about nature, how can we link it to equity issues? How can we link it to health? Certainly, how can we link it to local businesses? And with all of these different co-benefits, you start to see the weariness in local politicians maybe become a little bit more emboldened to try this, because it does create, does require an initial investment. But if you can show how it pays off and it addresses all of these other issues, I think that has been a really important showcaser for us.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think definitely I agree. And we have many cases in the Atlas where this was actually proven by an example that if the local government understands the value and the benefit that NBS can bring, they will be willing to get on board and do this nicely. Okay, so Judith or Sarah, if you would like to add something.
Yeah, I was thinking, yeah, thank you. I would like to add to what just Jennifer has mentioned about having local solutions or localized understanding of the challenges and the solutions is very, very important. It has, I'm studying these nature-based solutions from a design perspective, and this is one of the most important aspects of how through design, nature-based solutions can get implemented, is that it's really, there is no standardization other than, of course, there are guidelines and basic management of the urban space, but everywhere there has to be a localized design solution. And it's I think it's really challenging to urban designers and architects, because it's a shift in mindset of how things have used to be. So there's it's not easy to replicate nature-based solutions as they are from city to city, from country to country. Each time it's a new understanding of the local biophysical settings. And here other disciplines can help so much. So designers, urban professionals must work together with ecologists or other scientific fields to make MBS happen. But it's also a beautiful scope to have these nature-based solutions happen in cities. So I just wanted to maybe add this, that now there is really a huge need for multidisciplinary engagements within the urban area.
Thanks, Judith. Okay, so actually we will soon conclude our part, and we will give the floor to Jennifer, but just as a closure, I actually would like to ask Laszlo to maybe say a few words, and what I think is maybe would be interesting for our audience is that if a city wants to start working with nature-based solutions, how should they start? What they should do first? Or if they have already some solutions, what is the way to scale it up? I know this is a complicated question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I go back to one point that was already made, I think, by Attila, and that's the power of examples. And, when you have a working example in a community, obviously it's something that has that's there for a reason. So it kind of ticks the box on what Jennifer said on contextuality. It was established because it was a good fit in the mind of someone, people. It was a good fit in terms of the institutions, the financing, the technologies, the ecosystem features, the type of problems that people might see that they want to address with this case. So maybe that's one possible starting point, to realize that in a sense, these solutions are not a pie in the sky. In many cases, they are actually quite practical, quite pragmatic. They do require vision, but to some extent we live with them. It's just that we need much more of them. We need to make them more effective. We need to use them in better ways, and also whenever urban structures are developed in a way that are actually not conducive to the benefits that nature-based solutions can provide, then we think twice. We stop when we start realizing that actually there is an alternative here. And I think that's where, as I mentioned, also leadership comes in, and maybe, that is at the level of individual citizens. I mean, it's not just, someone has to start bring these ideas up at the right moment in the right places. Again, contextually, in well-defined ways, and I think that can start a process. And the last thought is that, which I think was obvious in many of these comments, that the nature-based solution is actually not just it's not a physical structure only. It actually involves a process. It involves governance. It involves the sort of the cultural and scientific and engineering kind of conceptualizations, what nature can do for us, and ultimately a process of building something and learning from it. So complex but highly powerful and highly worthwhile and really necessary.
Thanks, Laszlo. I think it was a good summary, or a great summary of what was emerging from our 4-year research work from Naturation and the other things that we are doing on parallel. So now I would like to actually ask Jennifer to take the floor and talk a little bit about the engagement that WWF is doing to involve cities in developing urban nature solutions. So Jennifer, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, and I have both the great pleasure and the huge challenge to follow up after that absolutely wonderful set of presentations, where I feel that I have also really learned a lot. Can I just check that you can see my screen?
Yes, all looks fine.
Excellent. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how WWF is engaging on the topic of nature-based solutions, but also our broader sustainable cities profile. And I think that matters also because, well, as we've heard in many of these presentations, everything is connected. So it's not just that we're looking at nature-based solutions, it's how we're looking at climate change, how we're looking at biodiversity loss, governance issues, etc. So I want to just start off with a beautiful image of a tiger, because maybe the first question you're asking yourself is, why is WWF addressing cities? Well, for us, this has been kind of a question we've asked ourselves internally and certainly externally. And it comes to some very key numbers. So I want to get out of the city for a moment and look at really where we are in context to nature loss. Every 2 years, WWF publishes something called the Living Planet Index. And the last one was published last year, where we have seen since 1970, a 68% decrease in the population sizes of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles. This is alarming on so many different scales, and something we need to wake up with when it comes to how do we address biodiversity loss, how do we shift the current trends and see that we can really conserve the remaining species and accelerate, but also, of course, the climate change challenges. So from WWF's perspective, last year and this year, we have been really pushing for what we call a new deal for nature and people. And this is something that we want to emphasize when it comes to the climate change conference, when it comes to the Convention of Biological Diversity, when it comes to issues on plastics, the new plastics treaty, across a whole host of different governance levels. This is something that we're directing towards national governments. And I'm proud to say we've had almost 90 governments sign on, national governments, I should say, 90 national governments sign on to something called the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. But we know it's not just about national governments. It's also about a whole host of stakeholders, from businesses, from youth, religious organizations, and not the least of cities. And so why are we looking at cities in particular? Well, we took at the trends when it comes to ecological footprint, and we thought, where's the biggest place that we can make change? And probably a lot of you already know this, so I'm going to run through this really quick, but cities are home to 55% of the population, 70% of carbon emissions, 75% of energy use. They're only 3% of landmass, and yet they are hugely responsible for natural resource consumption, up to 75% of natural resource consumption. But of course, they're also where money is made. They are places where we can create change, as we have heard so brilliantly from our Naturevation colleagues. And I'm happy to see that Laszlo also used this image, so I won't go into it too deeply, but just to highlight again, that every degree matters when we're talking about climate change. Whether it's 1.5, which we're pushing really, really hard in my organization and so many others to really see that as the maximum global warming, and anything after that will come with extreme consequences worse than what we're already seeing now. And importantly, this is even more a case in our cities. It's not just that climate change affects every place equally, but cities are warming at an unprecedented rate. A city like Beijing has already warmed by 1.7 degrees Celsius, and under a business as usual scenario, it can run up to 6.1 degrees Celsius. Why urban heat island? More buildings, more pavements, more air conditioning, all of these things that are heating our cities. And of course, the role of nature-based solutions is instrumental in this space. So from WWF's side, we thought, okay, this is a wake-up call. How do we work with cities? How do we inspire cities? And certainly what we've heard from our colleagues, how do we share those inspirational cases? So we started 10 years ago, something called the One Planet City Challenge. And we have had more than 600, 700 cities that have joined us on this journey so far, of which 275 cities around the world joined us this year. So we're definitely celebrating. And what is this? Well, we really first work with cities to help them to align with the Paris Agreement target and the 1.5 Celsius degree for maximum global warming. We do this in partnership. Everything we do in partnership, because we know that if we don't work together, we're not going to get to where we need to go. And I'm very happy to say that we've had quite a few Turkish cities join on. And if your city has not yet joined on this year's One Planet City Challenge, there is still a chance until the end of the year. And I'll send you the email at the end of my presentation if you want to encourage your city to join. We've also joined in something called the Cities Race to Zero, which is a key aspect when it comes to all of the city-based organizations working in collaboration in order to get 1,000 cities or more to sign up to the Paris Agreement by the time we come to Glasgow. So the big climate change conference next month in Scotland, we want to work together to really get cities to commit to meeting the Paris Agreement targets. We're also in alignment with something called the Science-Based Targets Network so that we can work with a lot of these different organizations to see how do we really assess to see how closely cities are making their mark when it comes to the Paris Agreement. And you might be saying, why am I telling you all of this when I should be talking about nature-based solutions? Well, these are inherently connected, and I hope to show you in a few more slides. So just before I get there, this is a little bit how the One Planet City Challenge works. So first, we work with cities to do their data reporting. Then we assess that data to see how closely they are aligned to the Paris Agreement goals. And if they're not there, we provide guidance in order to help them do so. They're assessed by an international expert jury, to which we find both national and global winners. And then we celebrate those cities. We recognize their great achievements across broad-based urban sustainability, their work with nature-based solutions, as well as energy and transportation. And then we also work with public engagement. So just to give you a bit of a pitch on if you want your city to join the One Planet City Challenge, we see this as important for several reasons. Public recognition, showing what your city is doing right, and also learning from other cities around the world, both nationally and internationally. Strategic feedback. How can we help your city to get to where it needs to go at the local level when it looks at global data and what global science is telling us according to the IPCC? And of course, cities are not just local governments, they're about people. We live in cities. How do we engage citizens on this journey? So this is something in addition to the One Planet City Challenge, we have something called We Love Cities. And this is a public engagement campaign. And we think it's really important because you have to love where you live if you want to envision how it can be even more sustainable. We see citizens and local governments competing against each other to pick up more trash or save more energy. And certainly we've also seen local mayors work with citizens groups on planting trees or really investing in localized nature-based solutions. So all of this journey has kind of got us to think, where are cities already and how can we see that they can improve? Well, it's important to think about how do we design our cities? And I think one of our colleagues just brought up design previously. So, for something that we've been thinking and reflecting on, are cities designed for people or are they designed for cars? And it's interesting to note that in many cities, up to 40 to 60% of public space is dedicated to cars in the form of roads, in the form of highways, in the form of parking lots. Our cities are not for us. They should be for people and for nature first. And then we looked at it's not just about design, but also those cars, those machines that we move around, and sometimes we have to use them to move around. They're also hugely detrimental to our health. So if we compared actually the most largest cases of disease, and many of these are connected to air pollution. So how can we, as well, I should say, data shows us that it's not just the emissions that are causing air pollution and creating cardiovascular diseases, cancers, respiratory diseases, but it's also contributing to climate change. So everything is connected, and we have to see it that way. Today, 90% of city dwellers breathe polluted air. Air pollution is responsible for 7 million deaths. We've been talking a lot about COVID and all the complications of COVID, but we need to see that cities and how we move around in our cities matters both to our climate change and to our health, especially to our children, because children breathe faster. And they breathe faster, which means they're so much more susceptible to air pollution problems. So how can we start to address all of these issues at the same time? Climate change, air pollution, greener streets and cities. So we put all of this big global data and we thought, okay, let's put it into a clock. Let's make it meaningful for people. So we took the average commute time, which is about 30 minutes. And then we broke down the data and we found out that 500 people die from air pollution related diseases every 30 minutes. And at the same time, 285 million that's the cost of that death and also that disease where people are not going to work. So there are huge social costs, financial costs. At the same time, we are contributing, we are subsidizing, an unsustainable economy, unsustainable transportation in the form of $268 million every 30 minutes. Meanwhile, if the average commute time or commute distance is only 12 kilometers, we'd like to see, can people do that on a bike, in particular an electric bike, or 8 kilometers on a regular bike? And of course, if you switch out of your car and you get on a bike, this is also good for your health. And how can we really push for people to have more sustainable transportation, getting on their bike, freeing up some of those public spaces that was dedicated to cars to instead be dedicated to nature? Now, I'm going to stop there because I'm not going to tell you to get on your bike if you don't have a safe way to get to work or to school. So what we also want to do is we want to advocate for local leaders and national leaders to really ensure that there are sustainable ways for people to get to work and school when we start to return to work and school, that is, in a more sustainable way, whether it's walking, cycling, taking public transportation. And yeah, speaking of disruption of society, we've all been facing this. COVID has had huge complications in so many places, and cities have been most impacted. But we've also seen that this is also a really important moment to see, how do we plan our cities? Can we, instead of having cities for cars, can we have cities and streets for people, allowing, socially distanced restaurants to open up to allow for local economic recovery, as well as reconnecting to our fellow human after months and protect ourselves? How can we start to reopen, but be mindful of changes? And so we've also kind of thought, okay, so if we were to move over more towards walking and cycling, how could we see that cities could actually be greened? Cities, that enable all people to thrive and flourish while respecting the ecological limits of our one and only planet. This is about equity in the end as well, because nature and green spaces are disproportionately allocated in cities. We see time and again from so many different research, the best green spaces are in the wealthiest parts of the city, but it shouldn't be that way. Green spaces should be allocated equally to people. So we've come up with a concept called socio-ecological corridors in cities. And we really want to see that these are corridors that connect. Connectivity is crucial, both for people to move around and for nature to move around. So how can we really tearing up the sidewalks, or sorry, not the sidewalks. If we're tearing up the streets and parking lots, how can we regreen our cities? Well, ensuring that they are still dense, that they're still movable and equitable and affordable. So this is some of the areas that we're starting to look at and build a new concept of how we can really promote socio-ecological corridors in cities. The other thing I wanted to share with you is our new publication, which is on urban nature-based solutions. And I also want to point out that we have a new website to show some of the work that we're building on urban nature. There we have some of our work, as well as some of our communications efforts, and also, how can we really explore the co-benefits of nature-based solutions in cities, whether it's about health, whether it's about access for new jobs, whether it's, addressing climate change or urban cooling in so many different areas. And we see our role as an organization. How can we help inspire, motivate, complement the excellent work of the Natureovation program? And how can we, really pitch it and promote it and help to accelerate it with some of the partners we work with some of the cities we work with? So for us, collaboration has been key. We work a lot with different organizations on the urban nature-based solutions topic, with some of the big city networks, as well as UN organizations, other NGOs, and consortium like biodiversities, and certainly in dialogue with our friends at Natureovation. I want to point out, if you're working in a city and or you want to encourage your city to do this more, we are coming out with a policy paper on urban nature-based solutions geared towards local authorities. It will be ready for either the upcoming climate change COP in Glasgow or the upcoming CBD COP, so the biodiversity COP. So we're really trying to get it ready in the next month so that we can, give that information that you can give to the cities that you're working with. And it's short, it's 2 pages, quick tips, how to best invest in urban nature and why. We've talked a lot about that too. There's also an urban cooling handbook coming up. This has been a part of the COOL Coalition, a bit of a funny name, but it's an organization led by UNEP, UN Environment, together with Rocky Mountain Institute, WWF, and many, many other organizations. And in there is a chapter specifically looking at nature-based solutions for cooling, especially when we see that, the demand on air conditioning is increasing as climate change increases. But this perpetuates the same problem of more and more urban heat. So how can we counter that? By investing in nature. I should also say that this publication on the left here was launched recently at the IUCN World Conservation Congress in Marseille. And it's one of the first ones we've done on urban nature-based solutions. And it's supposed to be very simple. It's quick, inspirational examples. And if you want to know any more, you can dig certainly deeper into a lot of these. There's a lot of other information out there. Certainly our friends at Natureovation have explained that. But what we wanted here was just to really show that, what is the first thing you're going to do to convince your local city to work on this? You have to show quick data and the value of doing this. And then if they say, yes, that sounds interesting, and then how to go a little bit deeper. So we looked at 8 cases from around the world. One of them was Malmö, Sweden, a city I proudly used to work at. And we looked at, what was this work that they've done in a green and blue neighborhood? Key here was that they invested a lot in open stormwater management. as well as green roofs and green walls. And they did so, really, they started out doing this when the neighborhood was having huge problems, social inequity problems, as well as problems with urban flooding. And they decided to invest in this project in order to preserve the integrity of the existing ecological status, but also, and very key, to restore degraded ecosystems. From the beginning, they worked in partnership with a variety of partners. It was led by the city, and the local housing company, but residents were involved, the local school, everyone. And a whole lot of different financing was important. EU money, local money, Swedish money, even private sector money. So, these projects do have a cost, but if you can think creatively on financing, this is crucial. And some of the lessons learned here, communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure people feel on board, that they feel a part of the project. Empower the local community. And what we've seen, just in this case alone, a 50% increase in biodiversity, a 20% reduction in carbon emissions, a reduction in unemployment. How do these issues all connect? It's really exciting when you see that when you start to invest in urban nature, there are these multiple benefits. Another city that we looked at in this case study is the beautiful city of Medellin in Colombia, where they're also investing in green corridors, tree pits, and other areas, rain gardens, and so, how do we really connect, just like the concept we're building at WWF, how do we connect ecological continuity between nature areas and urban areas? How can we restore degraded ecosystems, in particular in urban areas? And the idea behind this was really a greener Medellin for you. So, how do we involve citizens and make them inspired to see how important this is? Training local citizens and local companies to really feel and also, showing and demonstrating that this can be profitable long-term. So the great benefits here, a reduction in average air temperature, 36 green corridors created, 75 people hired for this project. And finally, just one more example, a wonderful daylighting project in the city of Seoul, which, similar idea of preserving the existing nature and also restoring degradations, inclusion among different groups, working with local researchers, but also what are some of the benefits that we're seeing? 100+ species of birds that can be seen in this area, 3 kilometers of an open stormwater park that in the middle of Seoul, and I have been there, and it is one of the most inspiring projects. You are in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the entire planet, and yet you feel like you're really in nature. I'm certainly not alone in visiting that park. 4 million people a year visiting. So, nature has a lot of value to really connect people. I'm going to stop there just to tell you that we're also, in addition to the work we're building on urban nature-based solutions, we're also starting to work on related topics, including on urban food systems. How can we talk about healthy and planetary diets, within the planetary boundaries of what we see when it comes to climate change, when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to chemical cycles, how can we really realize what is both healthy for us and also healthy for the planet, and certainly addressing problems of food waste, which is a huge issue. My final slide here, just to tell you that we are also working a lot on public engagement, and we have produced a new guide for local governments. This is pretty much ready to go, and it will be presented at a workshop later in this month in October 18 through 20, as well as 26 and 27. If you are interested or your cities are interested, please join us. One of the target countries that we're working on is actually Turkey, as well as South Africa, India, and several other cities in Europe. But we would love to have you on board. This first workshop will be in English, possibility for translation, but it will also be followed with regional workshops in local languages. So definitely, if you're interested in how to really engage people on the topic of nature-based solutions, but also on transportation, on energy efficiency, so many things, we want to work with you in order to learn together on this. So this is my final slide. If you want to connect with WWF on our city's work, you can find us on Twitter. You can drop us an email, find our website. And yes, as we do say, our motto is together possible. The challenges are immense, but we will get there if we work together.
Thank you, Jennifer, for this very inspiring presentation. I think you bring back a lot of issues to the global scene to explain that this is an issue that really does matter for addressing global challenges, but also the local issues at the same time. So I think it was very inspiring. There is one question in the chat that I see, and then possibly maybe it's something that you can address. So the question is that how NBS can be implemented in lower income countries. Is NBS also for lower income countries, or is it just for those in the West? But yeah, so the floor is yours.
Absolutely. I think it's a fantastic question. And it certainly has different challenges depending on where you are implementing NBS. But this new guide that we have produced, it has 8 case studies. And 4 of them are from lower income countries. We have cases from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia as well. We also look at Singapore, but we've heard so much about Singapore, and I don't think you can call that low income, but it's certainly an inspiring case. But we do see around the world a growing interest in nature-based solutions. Now, I just moved back to Sweden from 3 years living in Chile. In the city of Santiago. And I can tell you that in Latin America, for example, the topic of nature-based solutions is coming up so strongly. And I think people are really seeing that, if you invest in nature, there is an initial cost, but it has so many benefits. As the case from Medellin in Colombia demonstrated, a lot of people were locally employed, a lot of access to green spaces for people. And I'm part of something called biodiversity. It's a consortium led by the government of Colombia, as well as the World Economic Forum, bringing in leaders on this topic from all over the world. And the former mayor of Quito in Ecuador is one of the co-chairs. And, he's similar to what Laszlo was saying, get the mayors involved, get them convinced, and we can do this. It does come with a cost, but, so many things come with a cost. And I think one thing that is always an eye opener for me is how much we invest in roads and highways. And those are extremely expensive public infrastructure projects. Not saying that we don't need them. I'm not anti-car, but I'm pro-people and I'm pro-nature. So how can we start to rethink when we plan? When we talk about investing in air conditioning is growing the fastest in Southeast Asia. What if we invest instead in greener roofs and greener walls and street trees to really allow people to start to see that there is a benefit that doesn't come with a long-term cost? Air conditioning is a permanent cost once you invest in it. Or, how can we work with local communities so that some of the labor can be shared, and we can work with local schools so it's part of their education as much as part of reinvesting in cities?
Thank you for answering this. I do agree that it's possible. It's an opportunity that we need to examine, and then it's possible to implement nature-based solutions. Our work now with the global extension of the Urban Nature Atlas is also going to this direction, that we want to go beyond Europe now and see what is outside, and are there already existing practices. And we do see that it is possible to reconsider existing investment and turn them in a way that they are addressing climate change, biodiversity, and other societal challenges with the help of nature-based solutions.
Can I just add on to that? One of the things that we have seen, we work a lot in the Philippines, and the Philippines, of course, has been hugely impacted by so many different tropical storms. And so the question is not how much does it cost to invest in nature, but how much does it cost not to? One of the things that we're really pushing, and WWF has been working on nature-based solutions at different scales, especially at landscape scales. How can we invest better in, for example, mangroves, so that they serve as a protector against these devastating storms? How can we, invest in different natural solutions for creating more resilient communities across the board, or, protecting our riverbeds in order to not see flooding in our communities? So it does have a cost, but not investing in nature is actually much more expensive.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I don't know if anybody else from our panel would like to add something to this question on the low countries with lower economic development, and how is it for them? Laszlo? No, nothing. So we are good.
I may have a word.
Sure.
Is that I think it's a very important question. And the cases we have discussed were mostly from affluent countries. But the 300 million people that will urbanize in the next 10 years, they will mostly be in slums under very poor conditions. So we really have to think of cities whose mayors do not have the resources to do beautiful things that we usually showcase. And that's the vast majority of the 1 million mayors of the world. And I think certain NBS tinkering solutions, some we have mentioned here, can work even in the poorest of places and can be very low cost, low scale. Nothing is useless. We can use what is there and transform its functions at a very low cost and adapt it to the local context, as Jennifer has mentioned. Even without money, even without means, you can lead innovation in urban solutions. For example, Havana is a good example on how they became self-sufficient in food. So I think there's a lot of thinking to be done, but also probably a lot of research that also needs to be done in these places so we can see what works on a very, very, very low cost.
There is a last question that I think maybe we can take before we close our session, and it is maybe to Jennifer first. How can people be made aware of NBS, that it exists? Because I think many people maybe still don't know that this is an option.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a hard question. I think it is also a localized one. So again, where it matters, but maybe I could say, I told you I used to work for the city of Malmö in the south of Sweden. And we had a concept called the Nature School, where we worked with kids and we took them out of the classroom just to, the local park. It used to be something about rural areas, but we need to say that nature is not just in rural areas, it's also in cities. And there's a fantastic report from the Nature Conservancy that shows the majority of cities are sitting in the most biodiverse rich areas because, when humans first settled down, when we stopped moving around, we stopped in the places that had the best water, the best soil, so we could really create our communities. So nature is all around us. So, start with just getting outside, turning over a rock. What is under that rock, touching a tree, understanding that connection. And then, of course, this topic is very layered and we've heard some wonderful research from the Naturavation team, but, you have to start somewhere. What is that tree? What about standing under that tree on a hot, sunny day and the value of the shade? I mean, this is really all around us. We just need to see it. And certainly with COVID, we've also seen the benefit. People are reconnecting to nature. They want to be in nature, but we have to also emphasize it's about access, but also respect of nature so that we can really see that those natural areas are maintained into the future.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I think it was a very wonderful presentation from your side, and the work that WWF is doing is very important. So thank you for sharing the work you are doing. And as our time is up, I would like to just thank on our panels side that for all of our audience to listening us, and thank you for all of our panel speakers for their introduction and their speak today.